Hey, everybody. Welcome to our podcast discussion today. I'm Paul Robertson. I'm the founder of Secure Repairs and the president of Secure Resilient Future Foundation. I'm really happy to be with you today. And we're going to dive into a topic that's getting a lot of attention, but that's often misunderstood, which is why repairing business equipment isn't a cyber risk, but in fact, it's a cyber necessity. So we know conversations about right to repair often focus on consumer devices like smartphones and home appliances, but the market for business technology is massive, estimated at $6.7 trillion annually. And even in Colorado, the state where we're talking today, tech sector is huge and supports around 300,000 jobs, pretty big chunk of the state's GDP. But as businesses and critical infrastructure rely more than ever on connected systems, servers, routers, switches, firewalls, the ability to service, maintain, and repair that equipment safely and securely is essential for the resilience and security of businesses and communities. As it turns out, Colorado is the only state in the union with a robust right to repair law that extends to B2B or business-to-business sales and technology. That law is going to take effect on January 1st, 2026, and it promises big returns for Colorado businesses, both in terms of lowering the costs of maintaining IT infrastructure and helping to keep it secure from intruders. But some big corporations are lining up to try and claw back that basic right to repair B2B equipment, and they're citing cyber risks to critical infrastructure as a reason to do so. We're here to help you understand the actual nature of modern cyber threats facing businesses in Colorado and elsewhere, as well as critical infrastructure, and why a right to repair is a security benefit to Colorado. So with me here in the studio, I have three noted experts from the Centennial State, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you where in Colorado they're from. So Billy, let's start with you.
Hey, I'm Billy Rios. I live in Highlands Ranch, so love it here in Colorado. When I'm not in Highlands Ranch, I'm probably at one of the ski resorts snowboarding when there's snow there. But I have lots of hands-on experience doing actual security work. I've worked in cybersecurity all my life, mostly in cybersecurity engineering roles, but I also have a lot of operational experience in cybersecurity. What I mean by that is actually hands-on experience and like breaking into organizations and breaking into devices and things like that. Some of the notable things I worked on is the cybersecurity of medical devices, was involved in the research that resulted in 3 of the FDA cybersecurity recalls of medical devices, and also the hack of a power grid to kind of show how that's done as well.
Billy, I think I first met you at S4 18 years ago or something, where you were doing a presentation on medical device technology. You discovered the first software security flaw in a medical device that resulted in FDA action.
Yeah, me and a couple other folks did some research on a medical device and infusion pump, and that resulted in the first FDA cybersecurity safety advisory for cybersecurity of a medical device. We were also involved. There's been, I think, 5 recalls of medical devices for cybersecurity, so involved in 3 of those.
Very cool. Andrew, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm Andrew Brandt. In the day job world, I work as a principal security researcher for a company called Netcraft. But my sideline here, for the purposes of this podcast, is that I run an organization called Elect More Hackers, which exists as a feeder of people who work in my industry or who self-identify as hackers to learn how to run for office and run for office at all levels in the U.S. Part and parcel of that is that I do a lot of tech policy advising and advocacy on behalf of consumers and in favor of consumer protection to state lawmakers, to federal lawmakers, and even to local folks here in the city of Boulder, where I live.
And you also are very involved in the Malware Village at DEF CON and other events, right? Which is experts who come together frequently and dig into some of the developing trends in malware, right?
Yeah, so World Cyber Health is an organization that invited me to be on their board earlier this year. They operate Malware Village as well as some other events that are done around the world. And the mission of World Cyber Health is to boost the population of people who work in the same field that I work in, which is malware analysis and threat analysis, because we have a desperately low workforce of people who do cyber threat intelligence. And we need more of those folks. So we exist as an operation to introduce people to the idea that they could be malware analysts. We run contests and offer workshops. And at DEF CON, we had 23 talks within our village. So it was almost a conference within a conference. And we have operated 10 different Malware Village events around the world this year.
Last but not least, Danny Katz.
Yeah. So I'm Danny Katz. I'm the executive director of COPER. It stands for the Colorado Public Interest Research Group. We're a statewide consumer watchdog here in Colorado. I'm born and bred here in the state. And I've had the privilege of being able to do this work for over 20 years as both an organizer and an advocate for good public policy that helps improve the safety and the health of everyone here in Colorado and allows them to pursue their own happiness and well-being. And so Right to Repair really fits solidly in there, ensuring that people have the ability to fix their stuff. In the last 3-4 years, we have helped pass 3 different Right to Repair laws, extending these protections to people who have powered wheelchairs and other handicap equipment, agriculture equipment, and soon, coming January 1st, as you said, the broader consumer and business electronics space. So really excited to be here and make sure we're educating people as that law is about to take effect.
Danny, I'm going to start with you because you not only have been involved in promoting those Right to Repair laws, you've actually done a fair amount of research on your own into this topic of business repair. We all understand what getting our dishwasher fixed is, or bringing our smartphone to get the screen replaced. We're all pretty comfortable with that. When we're talking about business repair, maybe give us a picture of what that entails and what types of repair services businesses need for their IT equipment and other stuff that they use to run.
Yeah, this idea of Right to Repair is relatively new in the broad public policy arena. 30, 40 years ago, the idea of fixing your stuff was really just you needed the right part and you needed the right tool. And whether you were on a tractor or whether it was a landline phone or whatever you had, you could fix your stuff. And it's been part of our culture, I think, for centuries. You want to get the most out of the things that you buy. You want to get the most value out of them. That's going to save you money. You also want to make sure that you have options for fixing stuff. Some people like to take things back to the original manufacturer. Other people trust their uncle or the guy down the street or an independent repair shop. And so I think for a long time, we just had a whole market, a whole environment of lots and lots of people who were able to fix their stuff. But as more and more things come with the software and embedded in it, as we have more and more items that are quote unquote smart items, it makes it so that manufacturers just have more tools to be able to limit how we're able to repair our stuff. And it makes sense that why they would want to do that. If they can sell you something and make some money there, but then they can also limit how you repair it and who you go to repair it, then that's a money-making opportunity. So it makes sense that they've tried to corner that repair market. Obviously, though, that's really bad for us because if your stuff is hard to repair, you're more likely to buy a new thing, which just has a massive impact on just the amount of resources we're using in our state, in our country, in our world. It also tends to drive up costs if you don't have a lot of choices or a lot of competition there. So it has been increasingly important that we actually make sure that there are laws in place that protect what we have had for decades, which is this right to repair, this ability to fix our stuff. And again, when I talk about this with people, they tend to think about it in terms of their computers, their cell phones, but increasingly it's our refrigerators, it's our blenders. And more of these things come with the need to access not just a tool and a part, but to actually access documentation, to actually access firmware and codes that are needed to be able to repair them. And so it's been really important that we do this work. And as you mentioned before, you think of businesses. I mean, businesses are relying on more and more technical equipment, including servers. And so it seems like not only is this important for an average everyday consumer, but for businesses, this is wildly important. And I think Colorado is going to be a great place to do business once this law goes into effect because it's going to give people a lot more options.
Yeah, and Billy and Andrew, you both have worked for large tech firms in your professional lives. Is this ability to get IT equipment serviced and repaired, is stuff breaking just day-to-day reality of being a business with IT infrastructure? And are there business advantages to fast and affordable repair services?
Yeah, I'll go first. Worked for some large high-tech companies, Microsoft and Google, and it's a reality that you have all this equipment there, and of course it's going to break. In my roles at these companies, I was more of a cybersecurity engineer and a program manager. And so, to be honest, what we needed to do is take a look at some of this hardware, especially that we're buying, and make sure that it didn't have things that we didn't want, right? So we didn't want any kind of undocumented features. We wanted to make sure that we understood what the security risk exposure was, right? If we're going to deploy routers and switches and IoT devices, smart locks and smart lights and things like that into our data centers at Google or Microsoft, we wanted to make sure we understood exactly how those things worked, right? And a lot of that was examining and figuring out from a technical perspective what those exposures were. Because even though those devices are made by a third party, when we put those devices in our infrastructure, in our data centers, in our homes, we inherit that risk as well, right? So we need to understand exactly what those things are doing and how they work.
And when we talk about the types of things, repairs that might get made, let's say a fan fails or a power supply, right? These are incredibly common, just things that happen to all kinds of equipment, including networking and other equipment. So obviously a part breaks, right? You just want to replace a part and get the device up and working again. First of all, like Billy and Andrew, does that in and of itself, just flipping in a new part, even if it's something on the circuit board, does that pose a cybersecurity risk to the company?
No, I've actually been involved in hacking organizations, right? So on red teams and what they call aggressors in the military. I was actually the commander for a aggressor squadron for some period of time. And our job was to break into things. I can tell you right now, we never used a fan on any device to get into an organization. And I think the frustrating piece here is that cybersecurity sometimes is a complicated thing to understand. And some people use that complicated kind of nature of cybersecurity as an excuse to either do things or not do things, right? And when I see those things, it's actually pretty frustrating because it detracts from what's actually really important, right? In most cases, when we're breaking into an organization, we're targeting people. We're targeting employees. We're sending them phishing emails. We're getting the people to do something. I won't say you can never use a repair part to get access to an organization, but it's something that I've never done, and I've been doing this for 25 years of my entire adult life, right? So I think those pieces are definitely overblown. It's not the preferred mechanism or approach used by real hackers. And I think a lot of times when it is brought up in conversations, it's really a detractor from what's more important, right? And the important things that people have to defend.
I just want to add to what Billy said. I agree with that these simple parts are not usually the vector for problems in these devices. So I recently was working at a company called Sophos, which makes firewalls. And those firewalls have from time to time had security vulnerabilities that were exploited by threat actors, and those needed to be repaired through the use of software patches. I do find that there is a problem right now across the board in that security appliance industry, that there are the discovery and abuse of these firewall bugs at a growing and increasing cadence and pace, exceeding the ability of the companies to find and fix those problems. When I was at Sophos, we had a person who was submitting bugs to our firewall bug bounty program, and the very next day after those bugs were being reported, we were the targets of nation-state attacks that were targeting all Sophos firewalls everywhere using those bugs. And it does become a huge problem when you just can't keep up with the pace of new attacks targeting your products. At a certain point, software patches and those kinds of repairs, they are essential, and it is completely within the purview of the company that makes those firewalls when and whether to patch certain devices. But even though they are still operational, they may remain vulnerable over time if they haven't been attacked. My former boss, Joe Levy, termed a name for this kind of product where they may be out and functional, but just waiting to be attacked. He called them digital detritus. And there is just a growing volume of these vulnerable devices. They're just floating around. They're locked in some closet somewhere where no one knows where they are. just running silently, and they can be used against us. They can be turned into attack platforms by threat actors, and they have been. So I'd like to propose a more expansive view of what a repair is in this context.
And picking up on what you're saying, Andrew, the solution to that is to obviously get patches and fixes out to your customers more quickly and more seamlessly. Now, whether that's an over-the-air update or, again, having a healthy marketplace of service and repair firms can help you to do that, right? So get those devices updated, reconfigured, patched. That's going to reduce your risk. The more choices to do that, the better. And Danny, I was going to ask you, when we talk about even basic repairs, like fixing a broken fan, power cord, power supply, some component on a logic board that may have just burned out and needs to be replaced, those are pretty straightforward, don't involve access to sensitive data. How are those types of simple repairs being complicated by the manufacturers in your experience?
Absolutely. I took a tour recently of one of the business-to-business repair facilities here in Colorado, and it was really interesting from a hardware perspective. Again, as you all were mentioning, a lot of times they're trying to fix a fan or fix something on a motherboard. And as I understand it, there is some language communication that needs to happen between the device that you're fixing and the part that you're putting into it. And right now, increasingly, manufacturers are making it so that there's some sort of code or some sort of authorization that you need, even though the part totally works and even though it's designed for the thing you're putting it into. If you don't have that simple code, then the two parts are just not going to speak to each other, even though they would work really perfectly well together. And so it's that simple barrier. And so we heard from this repair company, a lot of times they'll take a perfectly good part, they'll plug it in. If it's not communicating, they'll have to try to find another part because they might not have that code if they're not the designated authorized repairer. And authorized really comes from the manufacturer. So it's the manufacturer's choice. It doesn't necessarily mean it's your best choice. And so it's hard to imagine a marketplace where you buy something and you're only allowed to go to the manufacturer. One of the places I think would really make people mad is if this was happening in the vehicle space. How many streets in America on a Sunday do you go down and people under the hoods fixing and repairing their vehicles? That's another market that has right to repair. But imagine if you bought a car and the only place you could take it to was the manufacturer that you bought it from. It's a similar thing. And sometimes all you need is a code. We had many farmers describing how they're literally on a tractor in the middle of nowhere and they just needed that code and they had to wait for the authorized person to come out with the code. So it does seem very frustrating when we did that tour with this repair facility and they just were highlighting like, everything's ready to go. We can get this business up and running within the next few minutes, but we just need that code. And sometimes manufacturers aren't giving it to them.
And to be clear, the code is usually delivered with the assistance of vendor-specific software applications that are necessary to interface with the device and so on. So not only do you not have the code, but just as importantly, you don't have access to the tools, the custom tools that they've created to apply those codes and read diagnostic data from the device and assist you with repair, right?
Yeah. And they even talked about documentation. I look at these motherboards and there's a million spots. Even for somebody who knows what they're doing, it's helpful to know which of the places do you actually need to go in and repair. And again, it just adds up. It's costly the more time the repairer has to swing and miss to try to figure out what's the thing versus having the documentation that would easily tell them, this is the place, go right here.
And on the issue of auto repair, interestingly enough, we just heard this week that Hyundai is requiring you to acquire a $2,000 adapter and a $60 per week subscription to change the brake pads on their latest vehicles. The owner, that's a pretty big cost. That's where the market is going. It's the inkjet printer model.
It's the abusive DRM model, right? They know that if they can put a chip into something that even if it is just rudimentary as like an impediment to create an additional step in the repair process, that federal law allows them to do that. And they're basically taking advantage of that to make every change or fix that you might want to do to any device you own a onerous and expensive task.
So, Billy and Andrew, I know the folks watching this are reading every day in their news feed about devastating hacks and data breaches that, and we're all getting these letters in the mail like, your data was involved. You got free credit monitoring. So, for folks who are reading those, and these are large corporations, small corporations, federal, state, and local agencies, and obviously critical infrastructure, what is driving and fueling those attacks? If you were to explain it to the audience, what is the source of vulnerability and exposure that hackers, those malicious actors, are taking advantage of? Billy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'd say it boils down to two camps, right? There's a technology camp where there's vulnerabilities in products, right? There's like actual software bugs that hackers get to take advantage of and then essentially take over that device or product, right? And then there's another piece of this that's really more of an operational side of it, where attackers are attacking organizations and people and processes and things like that, right? It's a combination of those two pieces together that results in most hacks. When we do this against organizations, we combine those two pieces together and use that to break into organizations, right? I would say in the vast majority of real hacks against real organizations and people, it's targeting the operational side and targeting people, right? It doesn't matter. You don't need a software bug. You just send malware to somebody and get them to click it. You get them to browse a specific page, and now you get to compromise their system, right? And so I would say in most cases, that's the real issue for most organizations, is dealing with that side, right? There is a technology side to it as well, right? So where people are exploiting bugs, flaws in code, I think in most cases, it's the people side that is affecting organizations.
Right. Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, yes, there's usually a small number of motivations that drive the attackers these adversaries who are conducting these attacks. It could be financial, it could be nation state sponsored for espionage or for sabotage. And to a much lower extent, you do see the cyber activist community targeting organizations that they disagree with. But I did just work on an incident where, individual small hotels around the world were being targeted in a huge attack. Their customers were actually being targeted, but the hotels were being leveraged in that attack. And the way that the attack worked was that first the employees at the hotels would be targeted with an attack called ClickFix, which is without going into too much detail, it's an attack that if the target falls victim to the social engineering attempt, it looks like an online CAPTCHA. That's something that's trying to prove that you're human on a web page, that they can end up with malware on their machine. So imagine a hotel manager or someone in the back office of a hotel getting hit with this, and their computer, which is used to manage reservations, both that come through their hotel and through third-party services, come through that computer. And once that password is stolen from that computer, the attackers have access to, for example, the list of all the people who have reservations at those hotels, and they can target those people with a phishing attack that looks like the hotel requesting a copy of their credit card in advance. And that was what the attack that we saw happening starting at the beginning of this year. And the attackers had registered more than 4,000 different domains to use to lure people into going to these phishing attacks. And then we discovered that the back end of this reservation system that all these hotels were using had been compromised by this malware attack. So if you imagine this attack chain and how complicated that is, but it was incredibly lucrative. Like, they are successfully able to capture people's financial details. People are handing it over to these attackers because they know so many details about their hotel reservation that's upcoming, including the dates of stay, the name of the hotel, how much their reservation is for. And so it's incredibly effective lure for the victims to just see all of this information that they know is correct and be like, oh, okay, they must just be needing my credit card.
And picking up what both of you were saying, Billy and Andrew, one thing, Billy, you were like, the attacks generally, the point of the sphere is really what we call layer 8, right? The attacks on people, on your employees or on individuals to get access. I look at it like That's about getting your foot in the door as an attacker, right? Getting in that front door. And then you can imagine breaking into a house where everything is locked down in a safe and so on. Okay, I'm in the house, but I got access to nothing. But the other part, why are they able to wreak havoc and get access to so much data is what you were talking about, which is the software itself that these manufacturers are putting on the devices that are running in these organizations is very vulnerable. A lot of it is very old and susceptible to attack. So once they've got their foot in the door, we talk about moving laterally, right?
Yep.
It's a very fertile ground for them to compromise and hack devices within these organizations, get access to data, and so on and so forth. Is that a good way to think of it, Billy?
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to think of it. And I would say one of the most frustrating pieces about the right to repair and people not allowing folks to understand how systems work, hiding that, is that they really do use it to hide the shoddy software engineering and cybersecurity engineering of their products. There's some nuance there where there are certain things that do need to be protected, right? So like cryptographic keys and things like that. But if you don't want people to look at your repair manual, because once they read the repair manual, they're going to realize how crappy your cybersecurity engineering is for your product, that's not a good reason to hide that. And a lot of people are using it as an excuse to not provide that so people can understand how their products work and what they need to do to secure themselves from the shoddy engineering. So yeah, it's pretty rampant. And a lot of organizations, I think, understand this. I know, like I said, when I was at Google, when I was at Microsoft, we would buy products. We would not trust them. We would try to spend some time to understand how these products worked. A lot of times the manufacturers just wouldn't cooperate and give us the data that we needed. So we're going to figure it out anyway. We're going to figure out how the device works. We're going to figure out where some of the issues are with the things that we purchased. And that way we can actually mitigate the risk in our own organizations against those things. And it's a long-winded way to understand this. And if you're an organization like a Microsoft or Google, maybe you can spend the resources in figuring this out, which they certainly did. They threw a lot of talented security researchers at these products. But if you're not, maybe you don't have the resources to figure this out. And it would just be better and more efficient if the manufacturer just gave you this data and said, hey, this is how our product works. These are the inherent risks with our product, right? So you can understand it and mitigate that inside.
Right. And to be clear, and Jay, I'm looking at you on this as well, Billy, Andrew, are you familiar with any prominent cybersecurity breaches that resulted from schematic diagrams or service manuals or diagnostic software? Is that an attack path?
I would say this: if your security engineering relies on the fact that you don't want someone to get a manual and read a page in a manual, that's bad security engineering. And you can blame, they got access to the manual. It's not the manual's fault. There's lots of good cybersecurity engineering that you can have in your products and in your software to where even if someone gets every service tool, every manual, even if they get the source code, you can still have robust cybersecurity engineering in your product and software. So like I said, it's frustrating when someone says, we need to protect this from a cybersecurity standpoint. It's no, you're trying to make it so people can't read these manuals so that they don't uncover that your cybersecurity engineering is actually really bad, right?
Yeah, I would actually argue, because I heard you say security through obscurity before, and I would argue that there isn't even any obscurity involved in putting something in like a manual, any kind of documentation.
So let's just do a couple explainers here. I'm thinking about terms that our listeners might be hearing a lot from folks on both sides of issues like right to repair. One of those terms is firmware, and it might be a term that's not that familiar. I don't know, Billy or Andrew, can you just give a quick overview? What are we talking about when we're talking about firmware? And does firmware in and of itself contain vital or sensitive information that it requires it to be kept from independent repair people or by the device owners themselves?
Yeah, I think when you look at a device, let's say a smart refrigerator, the actual logic, the way that the refrigerator works is actually software. It's code that someone wrote. And normally when that software gets loaded on a device, like a refrigerator or like in a car, instead of calling it software, we call it firmware, right? So really, when we say firmware, the easiest way to understand is really it's just a program. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? What's in the firmware? It's how the device works. And so the firmware for a refrigerator is how the refrigerator works, like how it cools and when the light comes on, when you open the door, things like that, right? And it's got that logic in there. And I know that some places don't want people looking at the firmware because there might be bugs in there, right? There might be software flaws in there, right? So if people that wrote that code, they're human, right? And sometimes they make mistakes. And so there's issues with the software that they wrote, right? And so that's a natural kind of part of software development. That's why we have update processes. And so sometimes people are saying like, hey, I don't want people to look at the firmware. I don't want people to look at my program because they might discover security issues.
Yeah, it's really bad when manufacturers try to use a security argument to prevent access to people who are relevant to want to know what is running on that firmware to be able to get access to that. And again, I can't help but I point back to the example of firewalls. So firewalls are basically, they look like these specialized boxes, but they're usually just Linux computers with operating systems running on them. And in the case of the research that I published last year and that I talked about at Black Hat earlier this year, these firewalls are constantly being probed for vulnerabilities. So whether or not you want to protect your firewall from being accessed by adversaries, they're going to get them anyway. And it offers no protection to keep the valid information out of the hands of customers of those products, or at least like large companies like Microsoft or Google, even though they might have security teams that probe those devices. Even they are not necessarily going to have the engineering skill of 1,000 people in the People's Liberation Army who are basically spending 24 hours a day poking at it to find vulnerabilities. So yeah, it's very counterproductive for vendors of any product that has some kind of firmware in it to pretend that the firmware itself is some kind of security control. Hiding the fact that the firmware exists is not going to prevent adversaries from getting access to it and poking holes in it.
Yeah. I actually want to touch on something that Andrew talked about here. I think like a common reason that we hear is manufacturers don't want attackers to get access to manuals or attackers to get access to firmware. But to be honest, attackers are going to steal that anyway, right? So when you have a paywall or you have to pay or you have to be registered in a program or it's stored on some SharePoint or document repository inside the internal network, and you're preventing legitimate people from getting access to these manuals and firmware, they won't be able to get access to it. But if an attacker wants it, they're just going to steal it, right? And so a repair shop is not going to steal it. They're not going to attack the corporation and steal the manual, but an attacker will. And so whenever I hear this argument of like, we don't want the attackers to get it, it's like the attackers already got it. And so really you're just preventing people who have a legitimate need to have access to these things from getting it.
And that's particularly true when you have authorized repair providers. So you might have hundreds or thousands of organizations out there that you're freely distributing this information to. The strength of that is the weakest link in that chain, the least the prepared, well-secured company that you're providing that information to. Danny, I was gonna ask you as well. We hear that argument a lot from manufacturers about wanting to put up, if you want to be able to repair our stuff, you have to register with us and get certified and so on. It's all framed in terms of quality and security. But as I understand it, most of it is really just about assessing fees for access to that data and those resources, software tools, and firmware updates, and that providers pay or customers pay through the nose for access to that stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, it makes sense from a business case. If you build something and you make something and you only get to sell it once, then you're only going to make a certain amount of money. But if you can sell it and keep making money off of it, because even though technically the person bought it, they don't actually have all the pieces to it, and you can keep charging them to either have access to it or not. We want businesses to compete on quality, not because you're locked in and they guarantee have your business. And so if you really are the best at repairing something, then you should stand on the quality of your repair. And if you really do have a service that's worth paying more for, I'm sure there's plenty of businesses that want to pay more for the peace of mind of having 24/7 whatever service opportunities. But we don't want to make it so that is your only option, because anytime we see a marketplace where you only have one option, it tends to be lower quality, higher prices. And at the end of the day, people who buy stuff, they have the responsibility to take it to somebody who they trust. And sometimes they will take it to somebody who doesn't repair it very well. And that's part of the market. Like, we can't be and oftentimes manufacturers don't always repair it the right way too. That was another thing that came up on my tour, is that just because you get the manufacturer or the authorized repairer doesn't mean that is the highest quality repair that you can get. And so once somebody buys something, they should be able to repair it the way they want, and everybody should be competing on quality, which can include anything from cost to service.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dan, because a while ago, there was two researchers who I have a lot of respect for, Charlie Miller and Chris Balasek, and they actually hacked a car, right? So I won't say which one, it's not important. But if you read their paper, they talked about the tools and the subscriptions that they had to buy in order to do the security research that they did. And I actually added up all the costs. It was like tens of thousands of dollars. I want to say they spent $60,000 of their own money to do security research on this vehicle, which resulted in a vehicle recall, by the way, because the cybersecurity issues were so bad that the manufacturer recalled that vehicle. So they spent $60,000, might have been more, of their own money so they could do research on this vehicle. And so I think that's pretty unreasonable. There should be more reach into people being able to do cybersecurity research of vehicles, of embedded devices, of things like this, right? So they shouldn't have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to see if there's security issues associated with products like this.
This is a good place to bring up the villages at DEF CON. So there's now 5 or 6 different villages that cover different aspects of embedded system software and seeking out vulnerabilities. So there is an auto village, right? There's car hacking village. There's aerospace village, which is looking at hacking satellites in space and rockets. There's IoT village, which is looking at all sorts of other kinds of internet connected devices. There's the voting village, where people are tearing into machines that are used for tallying and counting ballots during elections. All of these villages are doing important work at finding and publicly reporting on the vulnerabilities that they discover, privately in some cases to the manufacturers so they can fix them, and publicly in some cases because the public has the right to know that they are running a risk using certain devices. And these villages are incredibly important. They serve an important civic duty that is not satisfied by the standard industry practices that have been the case for so long.
Back to the terminology. So we talked about firmware. I think the other term that's going to get thrown around a lot, particularly in regard to business right to repair, is critical infrastructure. And Billy, you actually, in your work in the military and after that, have a lot of experience plumbing vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. So I would just ask you, how should we understand what critical infrastructure is, and also the cyber threats affecting critical infrastructure?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The cyber operations squadron that I commanded was actually focused very much on critical infrastructure. And so when I first started, critical infrastructure referred to things like power generation and water treatment facilities and things like that, right? So in fact, one of the missions we did was an attempt for one of the teams that we had that I led to actually try to break into the power grid, right? And so when you hear this term critical infrastructure, that's normally what people think about. What's interesting though is that the government, the federal government, actually has like a definition for what critical infrastructure is, right? And there's like 12 different pieces of what's considered critical infrastructure. And if you're on this list of critical infrastructure, then that entitles you to certain types of like government support, and can the military work on some of your systems or review them, things like that, right? Now it includes a lot of things other than like power generation and water treatment facilities. Critical infrastructure now encompasses things like voting systems, right? It encompasses
finance, right?
Like monuments,
Banking and
right?
finance.
Yeah, exactly, right? And there's a good reason why we want that, right? So if the security of voting systems is really important, and maybe the federal government should have authority to be able to look at the cybersecurity of a voting system to make sure that it's secure, maybe, right? But I think what we're seeing now is people using this critical infrastructure tag to hide and say, hey, we're critical infrastructure, so you can't look at our stuff, right? It's supposed to be the exact opposite, right? Being designated critical infrastructure should actually open you up to more scrutiny because you're so important to what our society does and how important you are to our society, right?
I would just add to that, yeah, those existing domains that are considered critical infrastructure, they also have the ability for organizations that operate in that space to start up and run information sharing and threat assessment groups. They're called ISACs. And so you have the like an ISAC for the financial industry, an ISAC for the hospitality industry and the travel industry, and for the tech industry. One space where we don't have an ISAC, and there probably needs to be one, is the security industry. The security industry that guards everyone else is itself under attack constantly. Why do we not have an ISAC? It makes no sense.
There is this sort of blurring that's going on, right, where companies are basically saying, if we sell product to critical infrastructure providers, then our technology is critical infrastructure. And as I joked before we go, in theory, if I make a coffee maker that is used by the company that operates the electrical grid, well, that coffee maker is critical infrastructure. No, it isn't, right? We talk, Billy, as you said, operational technology, right, that might be running water treatment plants or power grids, right, OT as we call it. But IT, switches, routers, firewalls, email gateways, those are used by all organizations, including critical infrastructure operators. So we can't paint those as critical infrastructure. Final question, this is wrap it up for each of you, Danny, Billy, Andrew. If you were to just be sitting one-on-one having coffee with, let's say, a Colorado legislator or staff member or someone who's hearing these arguments, hearing the stuff from the tech industry on why they need to repeal this business right to repair, hearing about the cyber risks that are out there and so on, what would your message to them be on how they should think about that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of nuance, and understanding that is pretty important. What I've seen in the past 10 years especially is folks using cybersecurity as a blanket excuse for not doing something. And unfortunately, the cybersecurity domain is so complicated to where a lot of folks don't understand exactly how it works, nor do they need to. But because they don't understand, they're basically being taken advantage of. And I think having some resources that they can go to help them understand those nuances, where the prioritization should be, and to be honest, whether they're being lied to. Let's just be honest, like when someone says, we can't do this because cybersecurity, and they're taking advantage of a little nuance or what they're saying is not true, it's a lie, right? And the only reason they're getting away with this is because cybersecurity is difficult to understand, and maybe the person they're talking to doesn't understand cybersecurity. So I would say to have resources available to help people understand exactly what they're being told and whether it's the truth is pretty important.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'd love to echo that. As part of the role of Elect More Hackers is it exists as a resource for lawmakers who are dealing with technology issues to come to people who have no skin in the game to ask for honest opinions and to be able to share with them information about what the threats landscape really looks like in ways that lawmakers can understand. And yeah, I would just say, please, like, there are people other than the lobbyists for the big tech firms that hang around inside the State House. Like on that second floor lobby, there is usually during the legislative session, like a wall of people like with their laptops just like hanging around, literally waiting for lawmakers to come out of their offices or out of committee hearings and to hound them all the way from one place to another. There are resources beyond those people that basically follow you around. And I hope that they would please reach out to us. We want to help. We want to offer guidance because I think that there is a general sense in the tech industry, and especially amongst cybersecurity folks that I talk to, that our lawmakers don't know enough and they don't seek out enough competent counsel from people who do know. And there's a lot of frustration among tech folks about that. And we just want to help. We want to help them make better, smarter, consumer-friendly decisions. So please reach out to us. We want to help.
Really great. Thank you, Andrew. Danny, I'm going to end with you. What are your thoughts and advice to the folks watching this?
Yeah, it's always been common sense to me that if you have more options, then you're going to probably have better options. The more options you have, the more likely it is you're going to have higher quality ways to fix stuff. The more likely it is you're going to have ways to save some money. The more likely it is you're going to get your stuff fixed more quickly, and you're going to be able to get more longevity out of the things that you buy. So that's always felt like common sense to me. But I am a kid from the 90s, and I saw plenty of movies where some nefarious person snuck into a building with a little thing, and they plugged it into the computer and downloaded all the information. And so it's very easy to fall victim to this idea of these things are set up, and if one bad person gets access to them, then you're totally screwed. And so we just need to say no to everything. And it's conversations like this that make me even more confident that the law that's going into effect on January 1st that will ensure that repair specialists and people who own this equipment will be able to repair their stuff and not create any new vulnerabilities. It seems that is now more and more common sense to me, overcoming those 90s hacker movies that I saw. Excited to be a part of this conversation, and I hope more people will watch this.
Really glad to have you all join us, and just wanted to end by saying thank you so much. And to the folks watching, as Andrew said, we got resources. Secure Repairs has resources. Folks like Billy and Andrew who are happy to talk with you, Zoom with you, or in Colorado, maybe even meet with you in person and answer your questions, help you to understand some of the, as Billy said, and Andrew said, subtle issues, right? Complex issues that warrant explanation, but also make sure you've got the information you need to make the best decision for your constituents, for Colorado, for the businesses. And so I hope you'll take advantage. Secure Repairs is our organization, secureRepairs.org. And maybe we'll come together and do this again. Danny, Billy, Andrew, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.